What happens when humans stop asking, what does this mean, and start asking, hey, how does this actually work? That shift from meaning to method is at the heart of what we are going to be exploring this week. Because once people begin to observe, test, and question, the universe doesn't just feel meaningful anymore. It becomes something that can be explained, and that is going to change everything. So let's pause here for a moment and really look at what's in front of you. Now, on the left, we have the geocentric model. This is a universe that is centered on the Earth, and you can see the Earth right in the middle there. Now, on the right, we have this new heliocentric model. Now, this is all about a universe centered around the sun. So the question becomes, what changes when the center shifts? At first, it might seem like a technical change, just a different way of mapping the sky. But it's much more than that. Because if the Earth is no longer at the center, then humans are no longer at the center either. And that shift is not just about astronomy. It is changing how people understand meaning, order, and especially their place in the universe. To understand why that mattered so much, we need to look at what people believed before this change.
The scientific revolution is one of the most important turning points in intellectual history because it changes how we decide what is true. For centuries, truth came from the authority, from Aristotle, from the church, and from tradition. If something had been said long enough and widely enough, it was accepted. But during this period, people begin to ask a very different set of questions. What can we observe? What can we measure? What can we test? And once that shift happens, it does not stay contained within science. It spreads into philosophy, politics, and everyday thinking. It reshapes the modern world. Before the year 1600, people did not separate science, philosophy, and religion the way that we do today. These were not seen as different subjects. They were all part of the same way of understanding the world. And at the center of that understanding is Aristotle. According to Aristotle, everything in the universe has a natural place and a natural purpose. Heavy objects fall, not because of gravity as we understand it today, but because they are trying to return to their natural home at the center of the earth. Motion always requires a cause. Something has to move something else. And rest is the natural state of all things. So in this model, the Earth sits at the center of the universe, not just physically, but symbolically. This is a world that feels ordered and predictable and meaningful. It is a universe that makes sense. And most importantly, it is putting humans exactly where they feel they belong, at the center of everything. So, the Aristotelian idea of the world is that the earth is at the center. But now we are going to shift our focus a little, not just to what people believed, but why they actually felt it was true. Why did they believe that the earth was the center of all things? And it wasn't just a scientific idea, it was a complete way of understanding the world. It was complete. It explained everything from the movement of the stars to where humans were fitting into the universe. It was coherent. It made everything make sense. Nothing felt out of place. And it was sacred. The structure of the universe reflected divine order. God was above, earth is below, everything in its proper place. And that meant something very important. Life had meaning. So if you look at this image, you can actually feel that idea. The heavens above, the people below, everything arranged in a way that feels very intentional. And at the center of it all are humans, not just physically at the center, but symbolically at the center of meaning itself. So, if this is the world that you believe in, what happens when that starts to fall apart? Up to this point, all of what I just said made sense. Earth and humans are at the center of the universe. The universe was ordered, predictable, and meaningful, right? But then something doesn't really line up. The sky doesn't cooperate. The planets aren't moving the way that they're supposed to. Sometimes they appear to move backward. Sometimes their paths don't match the model. And in order to keep the system working, scholars had to keep adding more and more adjustments, more circles, more corrections, more complexity. And this is the moment where something important happens. The system still works, but it no longer feels right. So the question becomes, do we keep fixing this model? Or do we start asking if that model itself is wrong? So this is where something really important happens in the history of it all. Instead of trying to keep fixing this model to make it work with what they were observing, Copernicus comes on the scene, and he does something much more radical. He changes the question. What if the sun is at the center? Not Earth, not us, not the planet that we live on, but the sun. Now, at first, this might not sound like a huge change, right? Just making that suggestion. But at the time, this was deeply unsettling. Because if the Earth is not at the center, then guess what? Humans are not at the center either. And what makes this so powerful is that this is not just a scientific shift. It's a shift in how humans are now understanding their place in the universe. Copernicus doesn't have all the answers yet. His model is not perfect, but it does something incredibly important. It makes people stop and start to question everything. And once that question is asked, it cannot be ignored. And I think that you're starting to see a theme here that's connecting every single module that we've been looking at. It's all about stopping and asking those questions, right? Once you get introduced to something that you might not have known before, it opens up a litany of questions, and that is what consistently happens throughout time. in history. It's like a domino effect. So now once those questions are being asked, they keep coming. You can't ignore them anymore. And now someone is going to start looking for evidence. Hmm. Aha. Who is that someone? Everything changes again. Because up to this point, people are still debating ideas. Is the Earth at the center, or is the sun at the center? But now Galileo is on the scene. He is going to do something very different. He says, hey, don't just think. Why don't we look? He takes a telescope, something very new, something powerful, and he turns it towards the sky. And what he sees changes everything. He sees moons orbiting Jupiter, which means not everything revolves around the Earth. He sees imperfections on the moon, which means the heavens are not perfect. This is the moment where knowledge starts to shift from belief to observation. Because now you don't have to trust authority. You don't have to believe everything that's being told to you by those above you, because guess what? You can see it for yourself. And once people start looking, you can't unsee what you find. So, what did Galileo actually see? Well, it looked a little bit like what you're seeing in front of you, because when he looked at the moon, he did not see something smooth and perfect. He saw shadows, craters, irregular surfaces, a big old hunk of cheese, right? So in other words, the moon looked a lot like the Earth. And that was a problem. Because according to the traditional view, the heavens are supposed to be perfect. They're unchanging, they're smooth, they are divine. But what Galileo saw it wasn't matching up to that. The heavens were not perfect. And if the heavens are not perfect, then the entire system starts to fall apart. Because this isn't just about the moon. It was about everything people believed the universe was supposed to be. And this is the moment where observation doesn't just support a new idea. It is now contradicting the old one. So now the question becomes, if the old model is wrong, what actually explains what we're seeing then? So at this point, the old model is not holding up. But that doesn't mean people just abandon trying to understand the universe. Instead, they start approaching it differently. So Tycho Brahe does something very important. He collects incredibly precise data night after night, careful, detailed observations of the sky. He does not fully accept heliocentrism, or the idea that the sun is at the center of the universe, but his data is some of the most accurate anyone has ever gathered. Now, then Kepler takes that data that Tycho has gathered and he starts looking for patterns in that data. And what he realizes is, hey, the planets are not moving in perfect circles. They're actually moving in what's called ellipses. And this changes everything because now, instead of trying to force the universe to match a perfect idea, we start letting the data tell us how the universe actually works. This is the shift from precision to pattern, from collecting information to discovering laws. The universe is no longer something that we are interpreting through meaning. It is something that we can now describe through mathematics. And once we start seeing these patterns, the universe begins to look less like a story and more like an actual system, something that follows its own set of laws. So when we step back and look at everything that we have just talked about, we can see that something much bigger is happening here. This is not just a change in astronomy. This is a shift in how humans are understanding the universe itself. We are moving from a world that is based on meaning to a world that is now based on law. Before, people were asking, what does this mean? Now they're asking, how does this actually work? Before, the universe felt like something designed, right? Something with purpose, order, and meaning. Now it's starting to look like something that actually follows rules, patterns, laws that can now be discovered and predicted. And that changes how people start to see themselves. Because if the universe is running on these laws, then humans are no longer at the center of meaning. We are part of a system. And that is the shift of the scientific revolution. The universe did not just change. Our understanding of it did. And more importantly, our understanding of our place within the universe was changing. So now it's your turn. This week, you are not just learning about the scientific revolution. You are going to step into it. What you're going to be doing this week in your discussion is I want you to imagine yourself in the year 1610. You have grown up believing that the earth is the center of everything, that the heavens are perfect, that the universe is ordered and meaningful, and now you're hearing something different. So your task this week is to choose a perspective and respond as if you were living in that moment. You're going to need to do 3 things in your post this week. First, I want you to choose a clear perspective that you're going to take. Are you going to think like a philosopher, a theologian, or are you going to be someone like Galileo or Kepler? Secondly, support your response with at least one specific idea or an observation from this week's material. And third, when you reply to a classmate, choose someone with a different perspective than your own. Now, as you're writing, I want you to really think about how your perspective understands truth. Do you just trust tradition? Is it faith? Is it based on observation? Is it based on reason? This is kind of sounding a little bit like the Plato's allegory of the cave assignment that we did our second week into the course. This is all about asking yourself, how do you understand your perspective on how truth happens? And you're going to be diving into that idea again this week, but just a little bit differently, because now we're in the scientific revolution, not in ancient Greece. And your choice this week is going to shape everything that you're going to say in your post. So again, what do you believe and why? So now that we look back at everything we have explored this week, it might just kind of seem like the universe itself changed. But in reality, what changed was how humans understood it. And we moved from a world that felt meaningful and very centered around us to a world that follows laws, whether we are at the center or not. And that shift is something that we are still living with today. How we understand truth, what we trust as evidence, even how we see our place in the world, all of that is shaped by this moment. The universe did not just change. Our understanding did. And it still is changing, even today, as we try to grasp the universe and all the different galaxies themselves. So, enjoy your lessons this week. And as always, if you have any questions about anything, feel free to reach out to me.